We begin our report with President-elect Donald Trump's growing list of picks to fill his next administration. Trump announced Thursday he plans to nominate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. That would put him in charge of agencies like the CDC, the FDA, and more. Trump spoke last month about bringing Kennedy into his administration.
Robert F. Kennedy cares more about human beings and health and the environment than anybody. I'm going to let him go wild on health. I'm going to let him go wild on the food. I'm going to let him go wild on medicines.
Kennedy has been critical of vaccine safety and called for the removal of fluoride from public water. He also said if confirmed to lead the department, he would fire, quote, every nutritional scientist, adding that the HHS doesn't need, quote, more medical expertise. Meanwhile, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are reacting to Trump's announced pick for another cabinet position. Former Congressman Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. Gaetz had been the subject of a House Ethics Committee investigation into several allegations, including that he engaged in sex with a minor, which he denies.
Elections have consequences. He chose Matt Gaetz. Matt will come before the committee, and he will be asked hard questions, and we'll see how he does.
What do you think of the pick?
I voted for a lot of people I didn't like.
What do you? He's selecting those who he's got a comfort level with. The real question is going to be, does the Senate, that has the responsibility for the confirmation, have the same level of comfort?
Well, we have a process around here for considering presidential nominees, and that's where all of the questions that you have and that we have will be answered under oath, and we'll hear from a variety of other witnesses. So,
CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now. Ed, good to see you. What more do we know about RFK Jr.'s agenda and his relationship with President-elect Trump?
Well, the relationship has deepened since he dropped out of the presidential race over the summer and became a close confidant of President-elect Trump, traveling with him a great deal in the closing weeks of the election. And in the days since Election Day, has been in Florida helping review potential picks and helping make early decisions about who's going to fill out the administration. He's perhaps best known as a skeptic when it comes to vaccines, but has said in the closing days of the campaign that he would not necessarily support a mandate, but with President-elect Trump's request, essentially allow people to have the choice. That kind of talk is going to immediately cause broader public debate about whether or not vaccines are worth it, the efficacy of them, the effectiveness of them, and that concerns a lot of public health officials and others who worry about the spread of various diseases. He's been a critic of or concerns about the need to tackle chronic diseases and a belief that the federal government isn't doing enough maybe to stop it, has claimed that a number of health issues have worsened because of a lack of federal action, like autism or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, sleep disorders, and fertility rate obesity, and has essentially declared if you're some of those subject matter professionals working at places like HHS, if he gets confirmed, they're going to be fired on day one. And what that speaks to, Lindsay, more broadly, is what we're seeing President-elect Trump do, not just in the health space, but in the legal space and in the national security space. A desire, based on the results of the election and Trump's belief that his supporters want him to do this, to seriously disrupt the status quo here in Washington when it comes to those that have been running these large departments and subject matters of great concern to people, whether it's national defense or public health. And in the interim, between now and Inauguration Day or whenever these people are confirmed, perhaps compel some of those subject matter experts, those longtime employees, those that have been criticized by Trump and his allies over the last several years, to quit or to retire early and to get out of the way so that it would be easier for them, once they get in, to start making changes to their liking. So anyone who's sort of shocked or concerned about this, frankly, wasn't paying attention during the campaign season when Trump and these allies that are now getting these positions signaled that they supported these kinds of wholesale changes. And it should be of no surprise to lawmakers on Capitol Hill who over the last few days have been reacting to some of these picks.
But there's one word you keep saying, and that is confirmed. What is the likelihood that an RFK Jr. or a Matt Gaetz gets confirmed? Is a recess appointment the only way forward? It sounds like some Republicans may now be wary of allowing Trump to do that.
So when it comes to Gaetz, the signals are there that he would have issue, and Trump is going to have to decide. Do you allow that nomination process to go forward? Because remember, there has been no formal nomination of him yet. He has said, I plan to. And if it fails or if there's signs of enough opposition, yeah, does he hold him back to perhaps appoint him during a recess? We'll have to wait and see. As for RFK Jr., it is a little early to determine that one since it's only come in the last few hours. He may draw an interesting mix of support, though. Not necessarily a lot of Democrats, but I think there are some Democrats sympathetic to some of the things he calls out, especially, for example, the corporate influence over public health officials or what they've done at the FDA, NIH, and other places when it comes to pharmaceuticals, how things are tested or approved, the cost of drugs. In some ways, on some of those various things, he may find favor. But he may also have issues, for example, with social conservatives, because this is somebody who is not staunchly anti-abortion. And if that wing of the Trump coalition and the Republican Party has grave concern, Trump may need to reconsider.
And while we've been on the air, Ed, we know that Trump posted on Truth Social that his own personal attorney, Todd Blanche, would be nominated to Deputy Attorney General. Blanche, of course, a figurehead by his side for many of his legal affairs, including the hush money trial in New York. Ed, former Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy was asked by Bloomberg News specifically about Trump picking Gaetz. Let's listen to some of what he said.
You say Gaetz will not be confirmed. Why bother with the nomination then?
You can talk to the president, but it's a good good deflection from others. But it also gives. I'll let it stand with that.
A good deflection from others. If you want to comment on the Blanche nomination and also what he means by that, who would he be deflecting from?
Potentially from Tulsi Gabbard to lead to serve as Director of National Intelligence, Pete Hegseth to serve as Secretary of Defense. Two other unconventional, potentially chaos-creating picks at the departments or the entities that they've been tapped or will be tapped to lead. Again, all in keeping with the Trump agenda, but sure to draw a lot of concern and potentially opposition within the ranks. The Todd Blanche decision, another one to be determined, but more of a legal professional and one that perhaps Republicans can understand. That, yes, this is someone close to the president. If he wants to be so far in cahoots with his attorney general, so be it. That's his choosing. We'll see if that choice perhaps not only draws more support, but maybe signals that if there is an issue with Gaetz, Blanche could be elevated to attorney general. All to be seen in the 60-plus days or so to go until Inauguration Day.
Okay, Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much.